Welcome to our show talking about investment. Today's episode, we are going to talk about Singapore. In the last episode, we have talked about Thailand, Japan, China, but today we are here with the incredible staff composed by Noelia, Hatsumi, Sebastian, Mateo, and I, Luis. So today, guys, we're going to talk about Singapore. That is an incredible country. It's a big country. It's a developed one. And the first question that I want to do is that if someone here has traveled to Singapore.
Answering your question, Luis, I've been to Singapore. I was there in 2018. And up to this day, I think it's one of the best countries I've ever been to. It amazed me the level of infrastructure they have. It just shows up how they are like 30 years in the future than where we are. I love going to that country because it made me realize how clean that country is, how impressive it was, and I believe that if I can live in a country like Singapore, I would be so happy, right? And I do believe that that the respect and the safety that there is out there just amaze me. You're not going to see any other country. It's very similar to Singapore. I think it's a unique country, has hot weather, and it's overall one of the best countries to live ever to live.
Wow, that's so amazing. And I have a question for you. Do you know if the tourist sector is important sector in Singapore?
Yes, tourism has increased a lot throughout the years in Singapore, as it was a very small country in 1960 where it got its independence. There wasn't a lot of tourism because you won't see what is there right now. A lot of tourism gone has improved in Singapore due to the infrastructure and the quality of life that they have, and also because it's one of the most economic markets around the world, one of the biggest ones. And they have created a lot of new hotels. They even have a Disney park. They host a Formula One Grand Prix. So tourism has increased a lot during these last couple of years, and the trend is that it will continue to keep on growing.
Wow, it was an amazing experience that you have been talking about to us. Additionally, I know that Singapore is also well recognized because of its airport, because it has an amazing waterfall, and I know that many visitors take pictures of that because it's amazing. I want to know if you have been there, if you know more about their airport, because it's a very well recognized airport.
Yes, that's the first thing I saw once I landed in the airport. You just can't tell how impressive the country is gonna be just by looking at the airport, and that's why I think that the level of infrastructure in Singapore is one of the best ones around the world. I do believe that in this case, a waterfall like that, you don't see it. It's a unique uh, sighting, and it just opens you the door to know how you're going to be seeing Singapore. And trust me, it's very impressive.
Oh, that's amazing, Mateo. All that what you have mentioned, it's really, really interesting. So I want to talk about an interesting topic also that is politics. The politic environment in that country maybe is going to be different from the rest of the country. As an Asian country, maybe they have different types or ways to do some strategies in their policies. So, Mateo, can you help us with that?
Yes, regarding the politics of the country, we have to go back to 1960, where the country was basically a left wing country and there was a lot of corruption. It was one of the poorer countries, but there was one prime minister, or should I say president, that came into power approximately in 1970s and 80s, and it changed the ideology completely. It turned the country to extreme right wing, and a lot of different citizens started obeying his orders because the rules were very harsh. And regarding of that, being able to follow those rules, which were basically being a disciplined citizen, helped a lot to make Singapore what it is today.
Very interesting, Mateo. I agree with some of the points you made. But I also have a question. An interesting aspect about the politics in Singapore could be the corruption. What can you tell us about the corruption perception in comparison to other countries, or at least uh, when looking at the Asian continent as a whole? What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can tell you that corruption is actually forbidden in Singapore, but it should be forbidden for all the countries. But in Singapore, there's a death penalty because of corruption, and that's why I think that the rules are obeyed a lot in Singapore, and you just can't tell the difference between a country like Cambodia that is one of the has been one of the most corrupt during the last years, and you can see the difference in infrastructure, in quality of life between both countries, and they are just some kilometers apart.
Oh, what an interesting topic. So, as we know, the economic environment is also an important one. So, I don't know if someone here, guys, can tell some important facts about the economic environment.
Yes, I have some data about that. The first is that, well, Singapore today is one of the economies that has grown a lot. Some data that I have in the case of GDP. Just give me a second. Okay, so in 2021, the GDP figure was 335.431 billions, making Singapore the 37th largest economy of the 196 countries for which, 196 countries. And in this year, the GDP grows in 3 to 4%. Well, what more? Additionally, today, Singapore is considered one of the open economies. Now that what involve us, which are business, in the ranking of doing business is the second place. Um, in recent, uh, as in recent years, the Singapore economy has long been characterized by strong growth, moderate inflation, low employment, uh, open fiscal monetary reserve, stable financial situations, openness to international trade and investment. And as a final point, Singapore is currently the most open economy, which make it an attractive country for investment.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, I have a question for you, Hatsumi. I don't know if you can tell us maybe the factors of the economy's growth in Singapore.
Well, some factor is about the now Singapore has moderate inflation, so I don't know how exactly is inflation today, but I know that in the last years, Singapore controls inflation a lot. Also has a very strong growth. As I mentioned before, Singapore is a country that characterizes uh, to very other countries do investment in Singapore because it's an attractive country to do that. Also, they they have low employment and ample fiscal monetary reserves and a stable financial situation too.
Oh, that's amazing. That's an important opinion. And talking about that, I want you to introduce to a new important point that is the commercial policies. For example, in terms of investment, they have applied a strategy called the green incentive to get that more and more companies trying to search or to apply some strategies related with the sustainable environment in terms of business. For example, trying to adapt some renewable resources in the production of energy, trying to reduce the emissions of CO2 to the atmosphere, and also reduce the environment impact of each production process. Also, one important point in terms of commercial policies is that new labor laws that trying to give incentive by the government to all the companies in Singapore to contract or to hire some local workers. Because some important point that I was to tell you is that around 34% of the workers there are like foreigners. So they used to enter to that market in a low price. So companies tend to hire them because they are, first of all, productive one, and they have a low cost of hiring. So it's important for Singapore trying to invest or give incentive to contract the local workers. In that way, they can solve or figure out some troubles in terms of the individual wellness of each citizen. A new important point also is the new tendencies or the new trends in the market. For example, I don't know if you have heard about the taking care about the oldest persons in Singapore. That is a really attractive business. For example, I have read that in Singapore, that is digitalized and a big world country, they only have like 15 centers of taking care of the oldest person. So most of the investors has studied these types of industry in terms of the opportunities that can receive them if they invest in that type of industry.
Wow, Luis, that's amazing information you have there. But I do have one question. What do you think are the new market tendencies that we are seeing nowadays in Singapore?
Yes, also a new interesting tendency is the investment in artificial intelligence. I know that maybe Singapore has invested in terms of technology, but specifically in terms of artificial intelligence, they are developing the industry. They are invest in trying to, for example, use robots in the production process, in the distribution process, and make a supply chain more efficient in terms of cost and in terms of time too. Also, another important fact about the new trends in Singapore is also the political impact of the foreign investment. For example, as you know, and as you mentioned before, I think what was Sebastian, the corruption perception index in Singapore has helped to the investors to try to invest in that country, and also they want to apply. They were to enter to that market because it's political in a political way is really stable. So it's an important tendency it's an important trend for the investors trying to invest in this country, considering that in the political, in the social, in the environmental um, aspects, they are really, really well. So talking about this, talking about investment, I don't know, guys, if you know something about maybe the incentive that the government give to the companies.
Well, I know many incentives that the government that do for, especially for international companies that wants to invest in Singapore. As it has been mentioned before in the economical and political aspects, Singapore has very strong points there, and that is making more international companies, especially global ones, biggest ones that wants to invest in this country. And for that reason, the Singapore government have many incentives for them. For example, there is one that is called attractive tax incentive, which is basically that the government offers a variety of tax incentives for companies and investors, such as corporate income tax, double tax deduction for internationalization, and in others, among others. It's very important to realize that in many countries, such as the US, companies pay taxes, a lot of taxes, no matter where it was earned. And also you have to pay not only in Singapore, but also in your country that the company is from. But however, in Singapore, you have to only pay the ones in Singapore. You don't have to pay it in the country that your company is from. And that is what making Singapore a little an option that is very attractive for an international expansion. Also, another incentive is that the government has many policies to be or to present an environmentally friendly country. They are putting Singapore as a very friendly country that people and investors can invest, and they support a lot of their activities that these companies worldwide wants to do in Singapore. And there are many advantages that make Singapore very, very attractive. And that's why since these years, the amount of companies that are entering into the Singaporean market is a lot, and that's why it's a very friendly country to start to make some investments. Also, it's very important to say that you have all the countries have the full foreign ownership for their companies. What is this try to mean? Is that in many countries, the companies you have to have a certain number of local shareholders in order to control the company operations. Of you have to have at least half of their shareholders needs to be Singaporeans or needs to be from the country that you are working in that moment. But in the case of Singapore, you can incorporate all the company can be enhanced with foreign people. Like you don't have to hire like Singaporean people to. It's not mandatory, and that is very open because it makes a very and it's convert Singapore a very attractive destination because you don't have there is no like any rule that you must hire like Singaporean people, but it will be like the best option, of course, but you can have the full ownership to decide if you want to hire them or not, or if you want to still have like your company very with international people. Like it's up to the company, and it's very open that, so that is also what it makes international companies to continue doing their expansion there.
I would like to make a precision. I have an observation. I've seen that I've heard that you were saying that Singapore allows companies from outside that are coming into Singapore to hire expatriate people. And I have an observation regarding this topic because I conducted some investigation in which I found that the Ministry of Home Affairs has to intervene first in order for a foreign company to hire foreign people. And of course, there is not a limitation per se, but uh, there is a process, there is a channel, there is a certain procedures that companies from outside have to comply with when trying to hire outside people from other countries. And I also found out that the manager of the business also has to be either Singaporean or must have an employment pass or must be a permanent resident. The same is the case with when speaking about directors. And the the Singaporean government establishes that at least there has to be two directors, and at least one of them has to comply with these specifications I've just mentioned. So I think that it's important to note that Singapore is, of course, a friendly country for conducting foreign direct investment. But these are things that businesses and people have to take into account before entering a country, right? The legal framework for conducting FDI.
Yes, well, what you said is totally true. I think the government has to be there in the case that company wants only to hire like international people and not like Singaporean. But as I said, like it will be good if companies like decided to have also Singaporean people in their in their companies, and also the government have to be there to see, okay, like what are your if you have like the requirements to have fully yeah, the fully like international people in your company, if you can hire some Singaporeans there too. So yeah,
I
that's
have
totally.
I have a fictitious case. For example, imagine guys that you are the CEO of a company in Singapore, and if in you have two options: trying to hire local workers or trying to hire foreign workers. If you hire the foreign workers, you can get labor force in a low cost, but maybe they were not prepared for the work conditions in that country. But in that way, what do you consider is it would be the best option? Try to give work to the local ones or trying to get work to the foreign ones.
I like that you mentioned about the labor costs, because one of the challenges that Singapore have is that they have a very low people that make they don't have many people that make labor costs. That's why they decided to bring people from another country to make uh, those things at the company. If I were
Yeah.
the CEO, I will totally decide to hire both, like international and Singaporean, because the Singaporeans know more about the culture there, know more about the policies, know more about their own market. And also with the help with international vision, I think it will be like very good to use both, to mix both, because at the end it will be also an international company that wants to do operations in Singapore, so you have to mix both, also national and international.
I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. There's also, I think, something that has to be taken into consideration is the fact that frequently FDI is subject to public or political scrutiny. And for instance, if it was the case, if a company only hired, if an outside company went into Singapore or perhaps any other country and decided to hire only people from the country of origin of that business, I think that that will be frowned upon. It will be frowned upon, and that a lot of the population will start to question why is the government not giving priority to the local workforce, and as it has seen in other cases for other countries. I also would like to note that Singapore, although it is friendly with FDI, it also protects certain industries such as the financial industry or the telecom or telecommunications industry. These are things that I believe every country should take into consideration, and even more if they have a considerable market share when regarding exports, global exports. But I don't want to get off topic here. But of course, the the government should, I think the government should set in uh, some rules that guarantee that Singaporean people aren't left aside, aren't left without a job when they have the abilities or the formation, the education to perform on certain jobs.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. But I don't know if someone here want to get another opinion or maybe a question.
Yes, I have a question, but first, I want to say that it's very interesting that both uh, what say before, and that is very open. Well, Singapore is very open in making investment, and as I mentioned before, the Singapore economy growth a lot for being so open in those investments. And well, now I have one question for Noelia. Uh, do you know which are the companies that makes the most investment in Singapore? I have some information, and I think the companies related to technology do more investment in Singapore, but I don't know that is true.
Yes, it is true. Um, I don't have exact information if there is like the most company that makes like the most FDI FDI there, but I have information of some pharmaceutical companies that, for example, Sanofi, that they have established a new vaccine production site in Singapore. As we know, the pandemic like have been affecting a lot of people. So Sanofi has decided to make a production uh, plant there, and they have invested a lot to do the new vaccines, and they decided that Singapore was a good country to make the plan in order to distribute the vaccine through all the Asian countries, or to, well, to the all the Asian region. Also, I have another. I do know about the company PNG that have opened a fragrance manufacturing plant in Singapore to in order to improve what is productivity, and also the to increase the international operations through all the Asian continent. So these are only two of many countries that have been making some new operations in Singapore, and both uh, are totally successful. So this is making that, well, this is telling us that Singapore is a good place to start to do some business, or to start to internationalize more the business, especially in the Asian region.
Yeah, the Asian region is just catching all the investment in terms of technology, and most companies are doing that in that way. So let's talk about one of the final topics of today's podcast. Let's talk about the FDI in Singapore, trying to be like more specific. And I don't know, guys, if you want to make an opinion here.
Yes. Well, FDI in Singapore has a heavy um, has a heavy reliance, I would say, or is mostly concentrated in the finance and insurance industry. Although I mentioned before that the Singaporean government protects the financial industry, this is regarding local banks, not international banks. International banks can be owned fully by outside investors. There's no problem in that. The observation, or the yes, the observation is regarding local businesses inside the financial industry. There's an exception to this also, in which, for example, if a company is in financial distress or is insolvent, let's say, um, it can be, an exception can be made so that the business can continue and the company doesn't default or enter into bankruptcy, if it can receive the help from outside investors or businesses. Well, in the year 2020, the finance and insurance industry had an investment of about 1.18 billion approximately, or excuse me, 10 billion. And following that, there is the wholesale and retail trade, and after that there's real estate, there's professional and administrative and support services, and which have a much lower, much smaller presence or attraction for foreign direct investment inflows. I mentioned that it was about 10 billion approximately for the finance and insurance industry, whereas for the other industries that I mentioned, it ranges from 2 to 3 billion approximately. So you can see the discrepancy, or the disparity, the difference, the heavy difference that there is in FDI amongst these industries.
And that's a very interesting topic. I wanted to ask, what do you think some industries receive more FDI than others?
Well, that's a great question. I believe that well, if we take into consideration public markets and this types of industries, well, of course, finance is a broad industry. It has several sub industries, I would say, such as investment banking, such as stock market, etc. I believe that it is also a reason for this is that a lot of countries try to diversify. A lot of investors in foreign countries, I'm sorry, try to diversify their portfolios, or try to mitigate risk by investing not only in a single country, but they also go overseas. Uh, this can be the case for hedge funds, for example, not for family offices, because family offices only invest on a local basis, locally. But it's very common to see hedge funds, mainly in the United States, to start to seek investment in other continents, and Asia has become a great opportunity for some investments with potential growth. Following that, I would like to say that indeed North America is the continent which invests the most in Singapore, followed by followed by the South and Central America. The continent which conducts the smaller amount of FDI in Singapore is Oceania, which may come as a surprise when you take into account the fact that these continents are right next to each other. But going back into how companies diversify or seek investments overseas, you could see that many countries or industry, the financial industry in many countries commonly seek investments overseas. So it doesn't come for me as a surprise to observe, to see that the financial and insurance industry is predominant or dominant in the FDI inflow. It becomes more attractive for investment and for huge amounts of capital.
Yeah, what a really interesting opinion, Sebastian. Thanks, everyone. I don't know, maybe if we talk about Singapore, we need more than one episode. We have to review some important points. I think is a best option to invest in Singapore, trying to understand the market, understand how the legal framework works, understand that Singapore is one of the most developed countries around the world, and also it's an special country to invest in different sectors, not only in technology, but also maybe in um, artificial intelligence, maybe in the transportation, social media, I don't know, many other types of companies that they can install and they can invest in Singapore. So thank you, everyone. Thank you guys. Thank you, Hatsumi, Noelia, Sebastian, Mateo. I hope you enjoy this podcast. We are going to be here in the last program, and we are going to talk about new special country. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you
bye.
so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
having us.
Maybe you can follow us. You can give a like and follow us on Spotify. So thank